Welcome to Mill History Talk, the podcast where we explore the past to better understand the profession of arms today. We dive into the campaigns, conflicts, issues, and commanders that have shaped military thinking across centuries, and why it all still matters. Whether you're an officer in training, a seasoned professional, a student of strategy, or simply curious about how history informs modern warfare, this space is for you. Our mission is simple: to foster insight, reflection, and critical thinking primarily through the lens of military history. Before we begin, a quick note. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the podcast writers, hosts, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency or organization. So, whether you're listening in a barracks, a lecture hall, at the gym, or in your car on the way to work, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Today, we're jumping back into U.S. Army doctrine in World War II. Last time, we looked at some successes, but today we're doing that critical analysis.
That's right. We're zeroing in on the things that, well, didn't quite work as planned. The missteps, the doctrinal shortcomings.
Because even though the U.S. Army achieved this incredible victory, the path there wasn't smooth, was it? There were some serious bumps in the road, organizationally speaking.
Definitely. And we're going to unpack how some of that pre-war thinking, those debates and decisions, really played out, sometimes painfully, on the battlefield of Europe.
We've got official histories, those Army Green Books, post-war reports, all sorts of good stuff to dig into. You'll hear about, the clash between the old guard and the innovator.
Exactly. And how that tension between doctrine, the plan on paper, and the sheer chaos of war forced leaders to adapt, often quite dramatically.
So let's get into it. Before the war, the Army was really wrestling with its identity, wasn't it? This big debate.
Oh, absolutely. It was this fundamental clash. On one side, you had the traditionalists, the chiefs of infantry, cavalry, artillery. They believed in what was called the combatant arms concept.
Meaning each branch does its own thing, basically.
Pretty much. Very siloed. They saw tanks, for instance, largely based on World War I experience, as just accompanying weapons. The things that help the infantry advance, not decisive weapons in their own right.
Right. And didn't the official rules kind of back that up?
They did. The 1920 National Defense Act put all tanks under the infantry branch, and the 23 Field Service Regulations explicitly stated that the infantry's mission was the overall mission. That really set the tone. Tanks were helpers, not headliners.
And some leaders were really dug in on this. I remember reading about the chief of infantry being heartily opposed to a separate tank branch.
Yeah, Major General Allen. And his successor, Fuqua, had that amazing quote, "Remove the horse and there is no cavalry." It just shows how resistant they were to the idea of truly mechanized warfare.
Wow. But there were people pushing for change, right? The innovator?
Oh, yes. On the other side, you had figures like the Army Chief of Staff, Major General Summerall. After seeing British mechanized stuff in 1928, he became a real believer in tanks.
He saw the potential.
He did. He even quoted J.F.C. Fuller, the British armor theorist, who said mechanized armies were the future, a whole new epoch in war. Fuller warned against thinking only in terms of infantry, cavalry, artillery, saying it makes your mind rigid.
That sounds like the crucial insight.
It really was. And the key American figure pushing this was Major Adnan Chaffee Jr., the father of the armored force.
Chaffee.
In 1928, he was the main architect behind this study, proposing a self-contained, mobile, combined arms force. Tanks, mechanized infantry, self-propelled guns, engineers, even air support, all working together.
That sounds like modern warfare.
Exactly. He was incredibly forward-thinking. He wanted mobility, striking power, inspired by, Civil War cavalry raids, but with machines. He saw the need for mechanized corps that could punch deep.
So with that kind of vision and support from the top with Summerall, why didn't it just happen? Why this struggle?
Well, several big reasons. First, the Great Depression hit. Money was tight, really tight.
Okay. Budget cuts, always a factor.
Then there was politics, a strong pacifist movement, the Kellogg-Briand Pact outlawing war. It wasn't exactly an environment pushing for radical military spending.
Right. Bad timing, maybe.
And crucially, that internal army resistance, what the sources call branch parochialism. Each branch chief was protective of their own turf, their traditions, their budget. They didn't want tanks stealing the spotlight or their funding.
So internal politics and turf wars.
Big time. General MacArthur, when he became chief of staff in 1930, actually killed the permanent mechanized force experiment. Cited the budget, sure, but then ordered each branch to mechanize within its own traditional role.
Oof. So instead of unified force, it was tanks for the infantry, armored cars for the cavalry. Everyone gets a little bit, but no combined punch.
Precisely. And the analysis we read suggests that decision really held the Army back from developing true combined arms doctrine, and that crucial operational level of war, the ability to conduct large-scale campaigns, not just individual battles.
And even seeing things like the Spanish Civil War didn't change minds.
Not really. Or rather, people saw what confirmed their existing biases. General Craig, the chief of staff then, still thought horse cavalry and towed artillery were essential. Tanks. Valuable auxiliaries. It's amazing how established ideas can resist evidence, isn't it?
Truly. Okay, so that's the pre-war setup. Lots of debate. Tradition winning out over innovation in key areas. Now, fast forward to World War II actually happening. How did this legacy play out?
This is where General Leslie J. McNair becomes central. Commanding General of Army Ground Forces. Hugely influential. Brains of the Army, they called him.
An important figure, clearly.
Absolutely. But he was an artilleryman. His focus was on centralized firepower, infantry-led fights, economy of force. Tanks, in his view, were support weapons. Directly opposed to Chaffee's vision, really.
So his philosophy shaped the doctrine the Army took into the war.
Deeply. And while he aimed for efficiency and standardization, which you need for a mass citizen army, his approach led to some significant shortcomings in combat.
Okay, let's break those down. Give me an example.
Let's start with reconnaissance. The official doctrine favored a cautious sneak and peek approach.
Okay.
But the units meant for this, the mechanized cavalry groups, were too lightly armed and armored. They couldn't really fight for information. They were supposed to see without being seen, but often that meant they didn't see much at all or couldn't push through enemy screens.
So they weren't aggressive enough?
Doctrine didn't encourage it, and they often lacked the firepower. During the Lorraine campaign, Patton's cavalry often stalled. Commanders just weren't getting timely intel. General Bradley actually noted they frequently had to use recon units against Doctrine just to keep things moving.
So improvisation was key even there. What else?
A really big one was the lack of fully mechanized infantry divisions. Think about the German Panzer Grenadiers infantry designed to keep up with tanks fighting from half-tracks.
Right, the U.S. didn't really have an equivalent across the board.
Not in the standard infantry divisions. They were still largely foot mobile. Armored divisions only had one regiment of armored infantry. This created a huge gap.
How did that play out?
In fast-moving situations like Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, the tanks would surge ahead, but the infantry couldn't keep up, flanks exposed, unable to hold ground. Commanders like Patton and Collins were constantly scrambling, borrowing infantry, making tanks do infantry jobs. It just wasn't built into the structure.
Okay, that's a major structural issue. Now, what about those tank destroyers? That sounds like a specific solution to a specific problem.
It was supposed to be. The tank destroyer force was McNair's baby, really. The idea was these fast mobile units with powerful guns would operate independently, rushing to meet and destroy German tank breakthroughs. FM 18-5 laid it all out.
Sounds logical. On paper, maybe.
On paper, maybe. But in reality,
Yeah.
almost never used that way. Commanders almost always broke up the TD battalions and attached them piece by piece to infantry or armored units for direct fire support, like assault guns, basically.
So not the independent mobile force they were designed as.
Nope. During the Battle of the Bulge, they were crucial for holding the line defensively, but that wasn't their intended doctrinal role. Both Bradley and Patton were skeptical. And after the war, the Army studied it and decided to disband the separate branch, a clear case of doctrine not matching reality.
Fascinating. Okay, what about keeping these fast forces supplied? Logistics must have been a nightmare.
It often was.
Yeah.
Logistical support doctrine lagged behind the idea of rapid mechanized advances. The U.S. produced incredible amounts of stuff, but getting it to the front lines, especially fuel, during fast pursuits was a massive challenge.
That's where the Red Ball Express came in?
Exactly. But the point is, the Red Ball Express was an emergency measure, an ad hoc solution created during a crisis. It wasn't part of the pre-planned doctrine for sustaining a rapid advance. Eisenhower himself said logistics, not the Germans, often became the main limiting factor after Normandy.
A fast army runs on fuel, right?
Absolutely. and Doctrine hadn't fully caught up with how to deliver it consistently over long distances at speed.
And command and control, keeping track of all this.
Also tricky, command structures at division and corps level were often set up for more methodical, linear fighting. They weren't always agile enough for the fluid, high-speed breakthroughs they sometimes achieved.
Meaning delays, confusion.
Yeah, friction, delays in decision-making. Think about market gardens. Synchronizing the airborne drops with the ground advance was incredibly difficult, partly due to rigid structures. In Patton's Third Army, you saw division commanders sometimes bypassing Corps HQ just to speed things up. Effective, maybe, but definitely not by the book. McNair's staff manuals reflected that more rigid, top-down approach.
So lots of friction points. What about the basic infantry squad? We hear a lot about the M1 Garand.
The Garand was great, gave U.S. squads excellent individual rifle firepower. But the infantry's overall squad and battalion firepower had issues. Only one Browning automatic rifle, the Bayer I, per squad.
Compared to the Germans?
Compared to German squads built around the MG-34 or MG-42 machine guns, putting out huge volumes of fire. In the Normandy hedgerows, U.S. units often struggled to gain fire superiority, got pinned down. Fire support within the infantry battalion was also kind of fragmented doctrinally. Bradley pushed hard later to get more BRRs and machine guns into the squads, based on that hard-won experience.
And finally, that core issue, getting tanks and infantry to work together. How did that integration actually pan out?
Armor integration remained a problem throughout much of the war, largely because of McNair's doctrine of keeping them separate, only attaching tanks temporarily.
So they didn't train together routinely?
Exactly. Infantry commanders often lacked experience working with tanks, and vice versa. It led to, well, friction and missed opportunities. They even created these group HQs to manage independent tank battalions for corps, but they were often understaffed, lacked good comms, more administrative than operational.
So commanders like Patton just worked around it?
Pretty much. Patton often bypassed them, used direct liaison, and smart commanders on the ground, like Terry Allen, formed their own effective combined arms teams ad hoc. Those teams actually became the model for the later, more successful combat commands within armored divisions.
Okay, so we've painted a picture of quite a few doctrinal problems: reconnaissance, mech infantry, TDs, logistics, C2, infantry fire, armor integration. It sounds pretty challenging.
It was, definitely.
But as we said, they won. So how did they overcome these hurdles? What were the strengths and how did they adapt?
Right, this is crucial. Despite the flaws, there were areas of real strength, and adaptability was key. One major strength: U.S. field artillery.
Ah, McNair's background.
Exactly. He invested heavily there. They had excellent coordination, great radios like the SCR-610, and they pioneered things like time-on-target barrages.
Where all the shells land at once. Devastating.
Incredibly effective. Massed artillery fire was absolutely critical, especially in places like Normandy, for breaking up German attacks. That was a huge plus.
Okay, so artillery was a definite strong point. What about Chaffee's original vision? Did that combined arms idea ever really take hold?
It did. Ironically, despite McNair's influence, the very unit Chaffee conceived, the fast, self-sufficient armored division, became the decisive striking arm. When the armored force was finally created as a separate branch in 1940, Chaffee was put in command.
So he got to implement his ideas.
He did, institutionalizing that combined arms team within the armored division's tanks leading, supported by mechanized infantry and artillery. That vision, though diluted elsewhere, really powered Patton's campaigns. You look forward to that concept of a deep battle, mechanized operational level. That was Chaffee in 1928, and it was fully realized in Desert Storm decades later.
That's a really powerful through line. And the commanders themselves, how important was their individual leadership?
Absolutely critical. Leadership and adaptation on the ground by guys like Patton, Bradley, Devers, Trescott. It was decisive. They constantly improvised, bent the rules, challenged doctrine when it didn't work.
Any specific examples?
Sure. General Devers down south, fighting along the Rhine, he was big on experimenting, creating integrated task forces that were way more flexible than the standard templates. Trescott encouraged initiative down the chain of command, making units faster, more responsive. And Patton, well, Patton was famous for ignoring rigid structures if it meant getting results, creating these fast, combined arms task forces on the fly.
So empowering leaders to make decisions based on the situation, not just the rule book.
Exactly. That flexibility was vital.
What about air power, close air support,
Yeah.
and the airborne troops?
Close air support. CAS was tricky. The Army Air Forces were separate from the ground forces, organizationally. That created inherent friction.
Coordination problems.
Yeah. They set up tactical air commands, TACs, which helped, but communication could still be slow, procedures cumbersome. And sadly, friendly fire incidents happened, like near San Lo during Cobra. Getting air and ground to work seamlessly together was a constant challenge.
And airborne, paratroopers. Big investment there.
Huge investment. But their actual utility was often debated. D-Day drops were chaotic, costly. Market gardens saw paratroopers trying to hold ground against tanks, which wasn't their ideal role. Often, airborne units were held back, seen as too risky to commit. Post-war studies even suggested using them much more sparingly.
So a capability that maybe didn't always deliver on its promise.
Or difficult to employ effectively within the broader operational context, yeah.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's a big takeaway from this deep dive into the U.S. Army's doctrinal struggles in World War II?
I think the main point is that success didn't come from perfect doctrine. Far from it. It came from this combination of incredible industrial might, certain key strengths like artillery, and critically institutional flexibility and leadership that allowed for adaptation under fire.
Doctrine was the starting point, not the final word.
Precisely. It was a guide, but battlefield innovation, improvisation, the decisions made by commanders often mattered more in translating plans into victory. Achieving that true combined arms synergy remained a challenge, especially outside the armored divisions.
And those issues with air support, airborne utility, those lessons seem relevant even today.
They are. And it's fascinating, isn't it? McNair's focus on standardization for a mass army was necessary, perhaps, but often clashed with the needs of fast, complex, mobile warfare. Chaffee's earlier vision, focused on that integrated maneuver, proved much more enduring, even if it wasn't fully embraced during the war itself.
The legacy seems huge. Post-war reforms, things like air-land battle doctrine. You can trace the roots back here, can't you? Learning from these experiences.
Absolutely. And the importance of flexible command, empowering subordinates. Those are timeless lessons in leadership, military, or otherwise.
So for you, our listener, thinking about this, today's military, today's complex organizations, they face different challenges, obviously. But that fundamental tension between the plan, the doctrine, the established way, and the need to adapt to a messy, changing reality that remains.
It really does. And the WWII experience, with all its flaws and adaptations, offers this incredible case study in how organizations can navigate that tension and ultimately succeed, even when the stakes are incredibly high.
So maybe the question for you to think about is, where do you see that tension playing out today between the plan and the need to adapt? Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.